What's up, guys? Boy, from FoxCast here. Welcome to an all-new episode of FoxCast Creepypasta, where today we will be reading part 2 of I Took a Factory Job by Mr. Outlaw, who is one of the most legendary creepypasta writers of all time. And I'm really enjoying this series so far. It's pretty good. He just has an amazing way of writing, and I love it. So, without further ado, let's get right into this, shall we? Let's go! I Took a Factory Job, Part 2. What's Happening in the Cornfields? By Mr. Outlaw. I suppose this will serve as my follow-up to my original post. I've realized some stuff. Things that weren't immediately apparent, but after a bit of introspection seem quite disconcerting. Winston is weird. Not personality-wise, though. I don't know what to call it. In a physical sense, maybe? I mean, he's always where I am. I don't have consistent hours either. They range from 6 to 10 per day, but usually aren't in the same window of time. What I mean by that is, sometimes I could be working 9 to 5. Other days would see me go from 7 to 2. Others from 11 to 7. You know what I mean? The thing is, though, Winston is always there, both when I clock in and out. Unless he inexplicably has the same hours as me, not likely for a man of his position, this is not normal. But there still could be an explanation for this. He is a workaholic. Those exist, don't they? But I just don't see anybody working that much. I've met up with Sergio at the bar one day. We've gotten quite close, by the way. And we started discussing this. Now, I just finished an 11 to 8 shift, and Sergio had essentially just woken up after finishing one from 1 to 10 a.m. Could you guess what he told me? Winston was there the whole time. He was there the whole time, 1 a.m. to 8 p.m. That's 19 hours. Do not tell me anybody works 19 hours a day. What was even weirder was that after all this time we weren't even sure what Winston did there. I mean, he really didn't spend that much time in his office. He'd either be walking around the ground floor, going up to the second, or simply disappearing completely somewhere in the back, only to come out a few hours later. Now, I never worked a managerial position, so I can't say for sure what he should have been doing. But it sure as hell must involve phone calls or paperwork or something, but he never seems to do any of that. Our conversation moved on to other things we found questionable about our respective situations. I told him about the inventory room and the man in the suit. However, those paled in comparison to what he told me. He was having a smoke out by his car the other day when he saw a woman coming out of the factory, seemingly bawling her eyes out. He called out to her, but she ignored him and continued running away, running into an adjacent cornfield. He decided to go after her. After a few minutes of trying to track her through the crops, he stumbled into a clearing. There was a singular, run-down shack in the middle. He could still hear the woman crying. With his guard all the way up, he walks in there. He finds the woman crouched in the corner, seemingly looking for something on the ground. He calls out to her, "Excuse me, ma'am, you alright?" She turns around, face absolutely covered in tears.
Who are you? Just go away!
A few seconds later, she pushes him downwards onto a section of the floor, revealing a set of stairs. Before she starts climbing down, she turns to him and says,
"Do not look at the man in black."
And just like that, she was gone. The floor returned to its original form, and Sergio was left standing there alone. not knowing what to think. He didn't try investigating it further. He considered mentioning it to Winston, although that never came to fruition. But here's the really screwed up part. The woman was back at work the next day. Sergio said that they made brief eye contact, but there was no reciprocation or familiarity in her stare. Again, he thought about talking to her about it, but he didn't. There was another instance where he wanted to talk to Winston about changing one of his shifts. Since Sergio couldn't find him anywhere, he tried his office. He knew that somebody was in there, because he could hear what sounded like a muffled conversation coming through the door. He furrowed his brow as he told me this part. "It was muffled," he said, "but a bit too much." Anyhow, he knocked on the door several minutes, but nobody bothered to answer. In fact, the conversation seemed to be getting louder with each knock. At some point, he simply just walked away. He bumped into Winston a few minutes later. He wasn't too terribly surprised. I mean, there was a tangible explanation for something like this. Some supervisors from a different branch could have been using his office for some kind of meeting. But that didn't seem to be the case here. Sergio told him that he tried knocking, assuming that Winston was there, but the guys inside never answered. He told me that Winston's face instantly morphed into one of horrific anger upon hearing this. "How many did it sound like were in there?" was his immediate response to this. Sergio answered with, "A couple," and Winston took off storming. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? But that wasn't even his worst experience. That came about on one of his night shifts. It was 3 a.m., and he was getting ready to leave after a strenuous 10 hours. At this point, the place was pretty empty. He started heading outside to his car when he spotted something out of the corner of his eye. It was partially obscured by the cornfield, but it looked like a person. Obviously, the features were pretty much impossible to distinguish from the distance and at that time, but he told me that it almost looked like the person was wearing a mask. They briefly stared at each other before the figure started running towards him. Sergio freaked out and bolted towards his car. He got in, fumbling around for the keys, before finally managing to stick them into the ignition. But by that time, the person had caught up to him. He said that they launched themselves into the hood of his truck, slightly cracking the windshield. That's when he got a better look at the guy. Now, he couldn't tell whether or not the guy was wearing a blank mask, or if he had no face. Again, it was dark. He told himself to believe the former. Sergio was in sheer shock, unable to function or even think. The person started banging on his windshield, producing more cracks and also a bit of blood. It was at that point where a group of extremely large men in security gear came out of nowhere specific and yanked the guy off. One of them told Sergio to sit still, while the other dragged the attacker away, back into the cornfield. They told Sergio that they were the nighttime security for the factory, and that the man who charged at him was a mental patient that escaped from a nearby hospital. But there were two things wrong with that, he told me. First of all, there are no nighttime security. I've worked these shifts before, and you think I've seen them by now. Second, there is no mental hospital within 500 miles of this place, so who the hell was that guy? During his following shift, Winston came up to him, apologized for the incident, and told him that he'd personally pay out of pocket for his windshield repairs. But he didn't seem to want to answer any more questions about it. All this, just from a few weeks of working here. So why don't you just leave? This shit is beyond screwed up. I told him as we were getting ready to depart. He responded by giving me a solemn-sounding chuckle. I think it'll be alright. I mean, it has to be. I got no other options. Nobody else is gonna hire me after what I've done. In the kindest way possible, I tried asking him what this was. Something bad, was his only reply. I guess that was a subtle message for me not to press any further about it. It's weird. During the entire time we were sitting at the bar, I could have sworn somebody else was watching us. I couldn't narrow it down to a single person, but the feeling was there nonetheless. The feeling persisted on my walk home, but this time, I could see him. It was a man, hood up and head downwards as he trailed me. I stopped, getting ready to confront him, when he simply brushed by me, but not before slipping a piece of paper into my hand. On it was a phone number and a message. The Dulles Company is not real. Call me. When I got home, I considered doing so. But I couldn't come to a personal consensus. I mean, what if calling him would only introduce additional problems? I decided to refrain from doing so. For the time being, at least. When I clocked into work the next day, I was approached by Winston. He called me into his office and gushed about how good of an employee I have been, and offered me a $3 per hour raise. I was incredulous at this. I mean, he'd literally caught me dicking around on multiple occasions. None of this made any sense, but I just thanked him and went along with it. During my break, I decided to send the guy who bumped into me a text. He never responded. After work, I decided to give him a call, but it was directed into an automated voice saying this number was not in service. I mean, hell, maybe the Dulles Company isn't real, but the money sure is. I think I'll talk to Chad next and see what he has to say. So things are getting interesting already. We have a guy who's following him. Sarah J.O. has some pretty interesting experiences. I mean, I'm not really sure what's going on with this company so far. But, I guess we'll figure it out in the next part. So, thank you guys for watching this all-new episode of FoxCast Creepypasta. Be sure to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you guys next time!